It's another scorcher in the city today. I'm at the archery range, which is also a disc golf course, and it is where I practice flying my drone. So in this episode, let's talk drones. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of this thing I call Chosen Idea. For those of you who haven't been here before, my name is Marco. I'm a creative generalist. All that means is I've been lucky enough to get paid to do a bunch of creative stuff throughout my career. I've learned some things along the way, and now it's my chance to pass those things along to you guys. Maybe learn a few things myself. I've actually learned a ton of stuff already doing this YouTube channel. Just recently, drones have become almost commonplace amongst both professional and amateur filmmakers all over the world. With a little bit of practice and knowledge, you can start shooting footage that would have costed thousands of dollars of invested money just a few short years ago. In this video, I want to take you through some tips and settings to get you on your way to producing some cinematic footage with your Mavic Air. For those that are Mavic Pro pilots or fly another drone, I think some of these may be helpful to you as well. Well, the magic all starts with our settings, and the first thing that we're going to want to look at is our picture profiles. With the Mavic Air, our default is normally set to normal. We're going to want to change that from normal to D-Cinelike. Mavic Pro users will have a third option called D-Log. I typically avoid D-Log and use D-Cinelike for the Mavic Pro as well. Within each picture profile, you also have the option of changing what picture style you want to use. We're going to use a custom setting for D-Cinelike. Let's change our picture profile first, and then I'll show you how to put the custom settings in. Alright, now let's just change our color to D-Cinelike. We're going to do that by navigating to our camera settings. Then we'll go to the menu item called color, and then we'll change that to D-Cinelike. Okay, let's go back one, and now we're going to go to the menu item called style. And at the bottom you'll see there's an option for custom. There'll be three numbers. There's going to be one for sharpness, contrast, and another for saturation. For those of you who just want the best color out of your drone without bothering to correct or color grade your footage, you can skip the next three steps and just use the D-Cinelike setting with a custom style of 0 sharpness, 0 contrast, and 0 or -1 for saturation, depending on how punchy you like your color. For all the rock stars out there who want to be all pro, here we go. Let's start with the sharpening first. As a rule of thumb, I typically avoid any kind of in-camera sharpening, and the Mavic Air's camera is no exception. In-camera sharpening is typically just not very good, and if you have to do any sharpening, usually it's better off done in post. Now, an exception to the rule is the Mavic Pro. The Mavic Pro uses a sort of denoising algorithm if you set the sharpness to 0, and it tends to cause any of your lower light details to turn to mush. To get around this, you're going to want to set your sharpness to +1 with the Mavic Pro. But with the Mavic Air, you're going to want to set it to 0, just like pretty much any other drone out there. Contrast is the next setting to look at. In my experience and the experience of others, a contrast setting of -3 is the way to go with the Mavic Air if you want to retain as much detail as possible within your shadows. Mavic Pro users out there are going to want to look at a -1 setting in contrast if you're using the D-Cinelike color profile. Something I should point out is that I noticed that although using a -3 contrast setting does increase the detail in the shadows, it does also introduce noise. Because of this, you'll find yourself using a denoising or noise reduction solution more often. If you want to avoid this, you may want to use a -1 setting, just like I would with the Mavic Pro. The third and last setting in the custom style menu is saturation. I like to set my saturation to -2 with both the Mavic Air and the Mavic Pro. Sometimes I'll play around. If I want things a little punchier, I'll go with the -1 setting for saturation. I invite you to sort of experiment yourself to find your own personal preferences with all these settings. But for now, let's set your saturation to -2. Now that we've covered our color settings, the next part of the cinematic look equation is shutter speed and frame rate. Shutter speed and frame rate also opens up another can of worms, and that's ND filters. Now, I'm going to come under some fire for saying this, but ND filters aren't actually necessary for most drone shots. More on that later before you bite my head off. So, ND filters sometimes come with a polarizer. Polarizers can help improve our shots in a variety of ways otherwise. The ND component of an ND filter facilitates us lowering our shutter speed to the point where we're achieving cinematic motion blur. Now, about cinematic motion blur, some people feel that it's more natural. That's open to interpretation because our eyes don't produce the motion blur that film does. Although we all do play a role in this film called life. 24 frames per second is what film is usually shot at. There are exceptions to this. Sometimes the director may be trying to achieve something else and we'll shoot at a different frame rate, but for our purposes, we'll shoot at 24 FPS. Now, that's regardless of what resolution we're shooting at, 2K, 4K, whatever. Some opt to shoot at 30 FPS, for instance, and then they'll edit down to 24 FPS. There's no problem with this. The extra frames can smooth things out a little bit. Or, you know, there's scenarios where you may be shooting in slow motion, what have you. So earlier I had some of you freaking out, or maybe you stopped watching altogether when I said that you don't need ND filters for most drone shots. Now, to explain myself, I'll say, we use ND filters to facilitate slowing down the shutter so we can achieve a shutter speed that's twice our frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 FPS, you're using a shutter speed of 1/50th. And that gives us that motion blur that we're used to seeing in the movies. Now, when you're flying with a drone, you're typically high enough that you're not close to anything that would get blurred by a slow shutter anyway. So in these cases, you can really use your shutter speed to achieve the exposure you want. You don't really need to worry about ND filters. Although, like I said before, some ND filters include polarizers, which can otherwise improve your image, whether it be saturation or cutting down on glare or the reflections from water. Now, that being said, me personally, I do use ND filters a lot when shooting with my drone. I like to fly close to things, close to the ground, close to tree lines, between objects, and the motion blur creates a heightened sense of movement. And not only that, but all my ND filters also have polarizers included. Now, in typical sunlight, you're going to want an ND16 or an ND32 to get your shutter speed down to 1/50th. I would recommend getting an ND64 for extremely bright conditions. If I'm shooting for slow motion, I like things tack sharp, so I won't use ND filters at all because I'll be exposing using my shutter speed. You want a high shutter speed if you want things tack sharp. And so if I'm shooting slow motion or if I'm shooting way up high, no real need for an ND filter. Slow, steady, and deliberate movements are probably the best way to make your drone footage look more cinematic. And lucky for us, most modern drones have settings for slowing down movement and also making the inputs for our controls a little bit less sensitive. The next thing I'm going to do is take you through some of the settings that I use for slowing down movements and making those sticks a little less sensitive, making the gimbal a little bit less sensitive and slower. So check these out. First, we're going to adjust our drone's yaw movement limit. The yaw is the drone's panning movement from left to right, right to left, and it's found by going to these three dots at the top right. Then in the column on the left at the top, you'll see the drone icon. Click on that. Then we're going to scroll down to the advanced area. Then in advanced, you'll see sensitivity, and there you're going to find the attitude, brake, and the yaw movement limit that we're going to set to 50. Now let's go back to the root of our advanced tab by using the arrow. Now we're going to go into EXP or Expo. Once we're in Expo, we see that there's three response curves, one for throttle, another for rotate, and then a third for forward right, back left. By default, these are set to 0.4. That flat response curve is for immediate movement once we move our sticks. That's something that you'd want to keep for sport mode, for instance. Just as a note, sport mode actually has its own set of throttle response curves, so if you switch to sport mode, it'll revert back to 0.4. But we're going to want to set these to 0.1. And then that'll give us a very flat start to our curve. so we're not going immediately into our throttle or our rotate, etc. The last thing we're going to adjust is our gimbal. We're going to want to go back to our main menu in the settings. So rather than going to the drone icon at the top, we're going to navigate to the bottom to where we see the gimbal icon. In here you'll see advanced settings once again. We're going to want to go into those. Here you're going to see pitch speed and pitch smoothness. I've got my pitch speed set to 10. You can set it to 9 or 10 or anywhere around there. And then we'll adjust the pitch smoothness. I've got mine set here to 19, but anywhere between 18 and 21 is usually where you want to be. Again, a lot of these are personal preference. Now since we're in settings, we can go back into our camera settings. One thing you're not going to want to forget is our white balance. And adjusting these manually can help, because often if you set the white balance to auto, you'll find white balance changing while you're shooting a piece of video, and it's very difficult to edit a mistake like that out as the color shifts in your picture. So I always recommend setting your white balance manually. So now that we've pretty much done everything we can on the settings side of things, we're going to want to do something about ourselves. We're going to need some practice flying. Thankfully, flying is a lot of fun, so learning new and complicated moves is just a matter of putting the time into it. Putting the time into something fun, it's not so bad. When you're at the movies or maybe watching one of your favorite films at home, start paying attention to shots that may have been done with a drone or a helicopter, maybe a crane, and you'll notice that complicated isn't always better. Sometimes a simple reveal done with an ascending or descending shot is exactly what you need. Combining some of your simple moves like an ascending or descending shot with a track, either left or right, can add some more interest, like we've got here in this gas station shot. An amazing exercise that I learned for drone control from YouTuber Matti Hapoja is to orbit around yourself, all while keeping yourself within the center of the frame. The reason this exercise is so valuable for making you a better drone pilot is that it really takes precise stick inputs to orbit around something while keeping it in the middle of the frame. You can do the same thing with DJI's auto orbit function, but you're not necessarily going to be able to jump into that while you're in the middle of another shot. So being able to do this can really pay off in the end, and overall it's going to make you a better pilot being able to do it. For a while now, I've really been looking forward to doing a drone episode, so I'm really happy that I finally got around to it. I knew I'd have a good time, and I did. Hopefully you had as much fun watching and you got something out of it. If you need those settings again, they're going to be in the show notes. I recommend that you print them or put them on your phone so you have them for reference out in the field when you're flying around. If you would like to receive email notification for whenever I post new videos, please subscribe. If you liked this video or you found it entertaining, please hit that like button. And remember, keep working to make your chosen idea a reality. And until next time, peace. Today I'm in the beautiful township of Melanthon, Ontario. It boasts two things: a 19th century graveyard across the street from a wind turbine farm, and one of the lowest population densities in this part of the country. Let's get flying some drones.